Evan, this is our harassment training episode. Have any fun harassment training stories?
I do. I gave a training one time to a client. This was several years ago. This is probably 8 years ago now. And I was still sort of a junior level attorney, junior level associate. And I'd been sent in to give some training, which is usually a very non-controversial thing. I'd been called in by the partner to give some training to a client, to some folks at a client site. When I got there, we were going through the training and somebody piped up during the training and they reported harassment to me in front of a group of fellow employees.
Did they stand up, like physically stand up and say, I have a story, I've been harassed?
Yeah, well, I don't remember that they stood up, but I was, going through examples of, okay, this is some questionable conduct, just giving some examples, talking through the stuff, illustrating the concepts. And this person was like, oh yeah, well, I've seen so-and-so do blah, blah, blah. And it was just like,
was so-and-so there?
Well, yeah, so-and-so was there. And I was just like a deer in the headlights. I was like, oh my God, what do I do here? I'm not sure how to respond to this situation. So I think I said something like, okay, well, let's talk about that offline after the class. But, I was just sort of new lawyer, had no idea how to deal with this situation. So I just sort of punted and was like, oh, we'll deal with it later, which I think is what I would have done even, being more experienced. But yeah, that definitely really, really threw me for a loop. I did not expect somebody to report something during the actual training. So,
well, it looks like they actually got the message.
It sounds like it, yeah.
But yeah, I think I would have said, let's take that one offline. Well, I have a story along those lines where I was giving harassment training once, and we got to the part of the training where we talked about what is offensive or not offensive could depend potentially on context. And I use as an example, for example, it's okay to say to someone, you look nice today, but it's not okay to say to someone, you look hot in that tight shirt. At which point one of the young men in the audience yelled out, you look nice in that hot shirt. Which, was flattering, but not appropriate. Welcome to Hiring to Firing, the podcast. I'm Tracey Diamond, labor and employment attorney at Troutman Pepper, and I'm here with my co-host, Evan Gibbs. Together, we tackle all employment and HR issues from hiring to firing. Today, our guest is Victoria Pasquale, Chief Human Resources Officer at Pritchard Industries. Thanks so much for joining us, Victoria.
Thank you for having me, Tracey and Evan.
So why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about Pritchard Industries and your role with the company?
Sure. So Pritchard, it's a janitorial facilities company. We're nationwide, and we clean office buildings, schools, hospitals, kind of all of the above. I am the Chief Human Resource Officer. I've been with the company for about 5 years and have all things HR, talent, risk, all safety, all under my umbrella.
I know you're a pretty large company. About how many employees do you have?
Right now, we're about 16,500, heavily dominated on the East Coast, but we are nationwide.
Wow.
Very cool. So I bet you've dealt with this a lot, Victoria, in your work, but as part of our practice, we've been asked many times over the years to give harassment training to company management as well as to, your more general rank and file employees. Sometimes companies, they'll use these web-based programs, or they'll do the training themselves in-house, with either someone in the HR department or maybe someone in the safety department I've seen before. I'm curious, how does Pritchard handle their harassment training?
So I'll tell you, we do all of the above, just based on the amount of employees specifically that you have to train in certain individual states where you have to get to the rank and file employee base, mostly heavily dominated California and the Northeast, which has those state requirements. So we do a lot of them via web-based, but also every couple of years we'll mandate in-person training. And feel that actually gets through to the employees a lot better, where they can ask questions, we can talk examples, we can talk different scenarios, but really that they feel like they have somebody that they can go to in person. Web-based is fine from a compliance perspective, but really in person is, I wish I could do it every single year for all 16,000, but unfortunately just not being able to have the plethora of trainers that can execute a sexual harassment training. That's, the other component is not everybody who can train on how to clean a bathroom can train on sexual harassment. So that's why we put them all together, all three components to get it done.
I was just curious about on your web-based training. Do you use, like a vendor to put that together, or do y'all do it in-house?
No, so we actually buy it from our learning management system creates it for us to be compliant with both New York State. We have separate ones for other states like Massachusetts, California, but it's a web-based platform. But also there are states that have their own components as well. Like New York has a pretty in-depth sexual harassment training that they've created. So we've utilized that as well for some of our employees that can't get to an office if they're in an outside location where it's a little bit easier for them to just access the New York portal and take the New York training.
Yeah, I mean, just harassment training alone is such a big undertaking for a company of your size where your employees are so spread out all over the country and situated in so many different clients. So kudos to you for having such a thorough program. In my experience, and Evan, I'm curious whether you feel this way too, oftentimes, I should say, actually, I can't think of a time when an employee has ever said, oh, yay, I get to go to harassment training today. Usually there's something that employees don't really want to go to, and they are sort of dialing it in. Although once they're there, in my experience, usually, not always, employees are pretty engaged, and they're a little surprised at how gray some of the examples can be, and it causes them to really think, and it turns out to be kind of a lively discussion. What have you guys experienced in that way in terms of employee engagement?
Lots of eye rolls. Yeah, I mean, people, a lot of times they don't take it seriously in my experience. I would say the majority, especially, and, again, it's just my anecdotal experience, but it's been a lot of times sort of rank and file employees it's hard to get their attention, hard to get them to focus or engage. They're just not really that interested. The management folks are the ones that I generally have over the years gotten more direct interest and engagement from, especially like you said, Tracey, when you get in those sort of gray areas and they realize, oh, wow, this is more nuanced and maybe more complicated than I originally thought. Because that's, I think that's the assumption for most people coming into it is like, oh my God, I know what this is. I know I can't slap my subordinate on the butt. I know I can't kiss my assistant. Like people know that and they think that's what this is about, is telling them they can't do that, like really obvious stuff. Over the years, I developed, different examples and things like that. I'm sure y'all have as well, that really get into those nuances and show that a lot of times it's, number one, it's more complicated as to what may be legal versus illegal. And also the importance of perceptions and evidence and things like that, I think is eye-opening for a lot of people, especially in management.
How about you, Victoria? Have you cued the eye roll, or do you find that employees are pretty engaged?
Yes, we get the eye roll. But I will tell you, after my first couple of doing it in person, I really took it back and changed how we deliver in-person trainings, because it's what Evan said, we were getting nowhere. And it was long, it was tedious for us too. And it's an exhausting day when you have to do a couple of them and you're like, oh my gosh, just get through it. So I took it back and really changed how we deliver the message. And one of the biggest things that we did is the very first slide is we throw up every saying that we've heard throughout the years from, gosh, I can't even say anything anymore. Like that's the number one saying is like, how do I even talk to this person? Oh, do I need a camera on me at all times? Should I record every conversation? Like those quotes that you hear when you're in investigations, especially of sexual harassment, that I take back and I say, let's just put it out there, kind of address the elephant in the room. So that's how our training, we built it, I revamped it to start that way. So it kind of starts, I don't want to say with some chuckles, like, oh yeah, I've felt that, I've lived it, or, you can't even say this anymore. But then it allows us to really go in and grab their attention right from the beginning of, we're going to talk about it. We're not going to, it's not about debunking, but we're definitely going to address it and throughout the training. And then really the training for us is extremely interactive. So it is, we will call on people, we will call them out, we will call in, and our managers have to be there as well with them. And we'll say, like, tell me what you would do in this situation. And so really very, very much interactive, but it didn't start that way. But that is how it is done today, which is probably why we can't do it as often as we would like, because these trainings can go for a long time with a lot of questions and a lot of different scenarios that they want advice on.
Well, the more questions you get, the better, because it means they're actually listening.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm curious, too, about, do you split your training up between management and rank and file employees? Do you do different training programs?
So no. Well, we do the leader, sexual harassment as a leader, and then sexual harassment, just conduct in the workplace for the employees. But our managers, when we get to the different locations for the employees, they are required to be there with the employees, because we feel it sends the stronger message that they hear about it as well.
Yeah, managing from the top down is definitely the way to go. All right, I'd like to pull in our episode, as we always do, looking at a TV show or a movie to illustrate our point. And today's episode, which obviously, as we've been talking about, is focusing on best practices in conducting harassment training. And for this discussion, we turn to Victoria's favorite TV show, NCIS, which stands for Navy Crime Investigative Service. This is a long-running TV show starring Mark Harmon, and it's spanned across as many as 21 seasons, a lifetime for some folks. And it showcases a bunch of colorful personalities as they investigate crimes, usually involving murder, committed against Navy and Marine Corps personnel. In particular, I want to pull in an episode called Driven that was in Season 4, Episode 11, back in 2006. And it opens with the unit attending a mandatory harassment training session from the DoD. So let's listen to a clip.
From the video presentation, it's clear that sexual harassment can take many forms in the workplace. A coworker with elevator eyes, looking you up and down. A coworker shows you a cartoon or photo of a sexual nature.
If you're lucky.
A coworker's hand accidentally brushes up against your body.
If you're really lucky.
Physical contact can be divided into 3 categories. Green light includes normal behavior. Yellow light includes borderline behavior, such as hugging someone or... Yep.
What's wrong with hugging people? I hug people all the time.
You may see it as friendly, but your coworkers may find it offensive.
You guys get offended when I hug you?
No. No.
I'm hugging you all in my mind right now.
DoD policy is very clear about this point, miss. You must first ask permission before making physical contact with a coworker.
Like, every time?
Yes. And finally, there's red light behavior such as deliberate, unwelcomed touching. Another question?
Yeah. What if you slap someone in the back of the head like this? Would that be considered inappropriate behavior?
Absolutely. Are you saying that this has actually happened?
No, I was just wondering. That's all.
So in the clip we heard about the trainer, she talked about sort of these red, yellow, green light touches. I'm curious, Victoria and Tracey, what do you think about that? I mean, do you think it's useful at all to use that type of, I guess, descriptor with different types of conduct? Do you think that's useful at all?
I have not heard a training where it was referred to that way. And in my opinion, I think it's a little broad. So it's kind of hard to put conduct into 3 broad categories like that. Victoria, what do you think?
Yeah, I thought the same way, that I had never actually heard red, yellow, or green from a conduct or a touch perspective. And also for me, when I re-listened to it after seeing the episode years ago, it really makes me question when you're asking the employee, why did you do that touch versus another touch? There's other things that could come in, like that's culture, that's how we would do it, and then what if it's like orange? Which way do you go? Do you go yellow? Do you go red? And then when does it stop? So I think it's just not as, I would say, black and white, but I don't know that harassment is ever black and white. But I think it adds too much gray to the situation that is not needed.
Not as red and green as it tends to be.
Right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I think it's a little, my takeaway from watching the clip too is it was a little juvenile. I think it was sort of made for TV. I hope the training isn't conducted that simplistically, because that's exactly what leads people to see here. They're going to have to go through this training and then start rolling the eyes and dreading it. It's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not 5. You don't have to tell me about, you don't have to color code behavior.
You're treating me like a child, yeah?
Yeah, and it's like y'all both said over and over. It's way more nuanced than that. It's so hard, and to sort of color code it, I think it oversimplifies a complicated issue.
I also think it gives employees a way out, because they could just say, well, I thought it was yellow. That's yellow conduct. So it can go both ways, sort of like the yellow being the version of gray, where there's conduct which is so clearly in violation of the policy. Either it's going to violate the policy or it's not. And to put a yellow in between there, I think just kind of is a bit of a cop-out.
I was thinking too, like, what if it's like 30 instances of a yellow?
Right.
It's also cumulative too, right? And I didn't hear that addressed. So maybe I'm not giving the trainer the benefit of the doubt. Maybe later in the clip in the training, she said, oh, you can't do 20 yellows just because it's a yellow. I don't know, but that's another thing that jumped out to me from that. What do you think? Can y'all even identify something that you think would be yellow? I know in the clip she talked about hugs. being a yellow light touch. What do y'all think about that? Is there anything else that y'all think that you would if you'd gone through this training, that you would personally identify as a yellow touch?
So yeah, when I heard hugs, to me, that wasn't yellow. I'd be more on the orange, almost red. But when I think of how to describe that, like, oh, I can't give somebody a hug, like I'm a hugger, right? But you don't know the other person might not be. Something as simple as you could say, could a side hug be a yellow? Maybe. But even still, like, I guess my take would be, why do you need to hug them in the workplace? Could you just shake their hand or just say, hello, this isn't your family, right? Do we need to really hug it in the workplace? That's what I would default to of, why did you feel like you needed to hug that person? Were they crying or was it just you were excited to see them? But yeah, I think it's still personal that I don't know that we really need to hug. So I didn't take it as yellow. I thought it was red.
That is so interesting because I thought I take a hug as like more on the green side. See, that's reasonable minds can always differ on the stuff. And that's why I think that color coding is so flawed because when I was geared up, I thought both of you would say, yeah, that's probably like yellow to green. So that was kind of where I landed.
I think that context is everything. It's really hard. And this goes to both of your points that it's really hard to plug this into a red, yellow, green and say all hugging is yellow or all hugging is red or all hugging is green, because very much it's going to depend on the context. But I also think this is a really good illustration of how intent doesn't matter. And what you guys are referring to is the character Abby, who's a hugger. And she's surprised to hear that it's not always appropriate to be hugging her coworkers. And very sort of sweetly says to the group, guys, is this okay that I'm hugging you? And they're all like, oh, yeah, sure, it's okay. And the trainer says, well, you may see it as friendly, but your coworkers may find it offensive. And that's the operative piece here is what the coworkers feel, not what Abby thinks. Abby may think she's just being very friendly. It doesn't matter what Abby thinks. It matters how the person on the receiving end is feeling about it. So let's bring in a next clip. So the next clip is about whether certain conduct is harassment if it's part of the job.
Yes.
Yes. What if part of your job
Gibbs.
includes touching naked people and
That's inappropriate at any time.
even if they're dead?
Why are you touching dead, naked people?
In real life, there are certain jobs where it is part of the job to sometimes have to view and hear about offensive conduct. For example, a healthcare worker may need to see someone's naked body, or an HR manager may need to hear a racist joke as part of the investigation of a claim of harassment. Another example, which I think about a lot, is when employees are hired by social media companies to view and remove offensive posts from their sites. That's a job, actually. How should a company ensure that the employee who has this job that's exposing them to offensive conduct on a regular basis, how can you go about making the employee feel comfortable about that job?
So in HR, you face it every day. When you hire somebody for I think any position is going to be put into situations in a leadership position that they're going to have tough conversations. They might get yelled at. They might be cursed at. They, are going to have to deal with that. But in certain situations, I think of my own HR team, you are in some tough conversations and I always say nobody's high-fiving, yay, we got to go talk to HR. It's a matter of if we're doing an investigation, they're already on the defense. They're already hands up that they think that they're in trouble. And so you're trying to get to the truth. And sometimes, as I tell my team, you just got to let them tell the truth, but you have to be prepared that might make you uncomfortable. And so in the hiring process for me, specifically that I've done my whole career, is to really be very poignant and careful to explain, like, you're going to hear things, you're going to see things, you're going to be exposed. And if you're not prepared for that, it can really derail you. It can go home with you, and that creates a problem, outside of work. So are you prepared for that? And let's talk through. So I ask all of my teams, tell me how you deal with it. So when you hear things or you're called a name or you're yelled at, how do you deal with it? And then what are some of the things that we can do to try to help with that, whether it's witnesses, whether it's different people in the office or nearby or in a crowded room, that might help diffuse the situation if you're talking to them at a Starbucks versus talking to them behind a closed door and it's just you and them, can really help as well. So that's some of the things that we take on that I encourage in any hiring process, is to really talk about not just the day-to-day work, but what are some of the other aspects of the job.
Yeah, I think there's a really good approach to make sure that your employees, are going in, the applicant's going in with their eyes open as to what the job might entail, and that you're giving them the tools to speak up if they're feeling uncomfortable and giving them methods to maybe mitigate the feeling of being uncomfortable doing the work that may be a little bit offensive. So it was interesting to learn when I was researching NCIS that the actress who played Abby, Polly Perrette, she actually left the show abruptly in 2018 after a workplace argument with Mark Harmon, the main actor, when Mark Harmon insisted on bringing his dog on set, and the dog apparently bit one or more people. Perrette then went on Twitter and alluded to leaving the show because of, quote, multiple physical assaults, which really I thought was an interesting jumping off point to talk about the topic of how do you address the fact that we are well into the age of social media. How do you address the topic of social media in your harassment trainings?
It's a fun conversation that I think you can imagine in any day that it can get out of control very, very quickly. So because you're walking a fine line as the company of what is their free speech and their freedom of expression, and then what is also bad-mouthing the company. So in our harassment policies, as well as when they are first hired, we go over exactly what is our social media policy. And it's spelled out in the handbook. It's spelled out in our code of conduct of what can and cannot be posted or should and should not be posted as far as the company. But I will say we do walk a fine line if a person posts something about what has been done to them and not necessarily, I would say, calling out the company. So is it really against the company, or are they expressing their right to say what they want to say publicly? Yeah, I think you can do the broad case of the social media policies, but then every single case can change immediately by what is said and whether or not it truly violates the internal policy or is it public expression.
Definitely a fine line there, right? Evan, how about you? Like, how do you handle sort of electronic media, social media as a component of your harassment training presentations?
Yeah. I mean, what I've always said, and I think this, is you find this in a lot of the policies as well, is to make it really clear to folks that the stuff that happens online, whether it's going into somebody's direct messages on Instagram or whatever, just because you're doing it online out of the workplace, it can still violate federal and state harassment laws. You can't harass somebody that at work through their direct messages, just like you couldn't do it to them plant floor or in the office, in their cubicle, whatever the case may be. And I think that's always been to me a pretty important point to convey, because I think a lot of folks, and I've gotten these questions before, that some folks feel like, well, it's my personal time. If I want to hit on somebody that I work with and I don't do it at work intentionally so that I'm not violating a policy, I mean, it's my personal time. I can do whatever I want. And making clear that there are limitations around that outside of the workplace, or at least very real legal implications can flow from that, I think has always been something that I've wanted to make really clear from the beginning. And especially, for managers who may follow subordinates or vice versa, and then may see some of this kind of conduct online, knowing that there could be things that they need to report that they've seen, in their personal Instagram feed or LinkedIn or whatever the case may be, that they need to keep an eye out for that stuff, even when they may be sort of off the clock and maybe not thinking about work. So yeah, I think it's definitely a really important component of the training and policies.
Because it's a really important component of a lot of the litigation, right? These days, most harassment cases rise and fall on what's in a text message, what's in an instant message, what's in an email. And employees, even now, even after we've said it over and over and over again, employees don't realize that these electronic communications really can't be deleted, and they are sort of around forever, and they become a piece of evidence in a litigation.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's always, and just to that point, I'll say that that's a really good point to make clear to folks, is that just because a communication occurs on a personal device, in a personal email account, on a personal social media account, we will absolutely find it. You can't do it and delete it. So don't think that you're going to be sly and you're going to delete it. We will find it. It will come back out. So if it's something bad, you need to assume that you're creating a permanent record, because this comes up in every case that I deal with.
Every case.
Yeah, every time. It's either text messages. In my experience, it's less often social media, but it's always text messages every time.
And instant messages. I've been seeing more and more cases where instant messages can be, all of it's evidence if you can find it. And it goes both ways, because it may go to show the harassment or prove the harassment, but it also may prove that there's consensual relationship going on here. So let everybody be aware of what you're saying on these electronic communication programs. One other topic I want to hit is the character Tony in NCIS. He is quite the character. He's constantly sort of hitting people on the back of the head and making comments and just saying and doing things that are just so inappropriate for the workplace. And in some respects, I feel like this episode's a little dated now. It's back from 2006. And I wonder if they would even make an episode that showed this kind of blatant behavior in this day and age, although who knows. I read a comment on Reddit that said, "Face it, Tony is a human resource manager's nightmare. His consistent comments and sexual innuendos would leave the agency, meaning NCIS, open to a lot of liability." And then there was this guy named Gibbs, not our Evan Gibbs, who is his immediate supervisor. In this Reddit comment, they said that Gibbs, as his immediate supervisor, would be in trouble for not addressing the issue nor reporting it. Good thing this is a TV show. What's your feeling about that? Where are supervisor responsibilities and how do you address that in training?
Yeah. So the supervisors, it's definitely a hard one for them when they see it because they're already struggling with, is this really bad? Is this okay? They're walking we'll say the yellow line, like, is it really reportable? Is it not reportable? Also, in the back of their head, they're probably saying, like, is this going to be more work for me too? So if I report it, like, am I going to have to investigate it? And is it really that bad? So really, those are the conversations that we talk about is the moment you send it to HR, think of it this way. You're not telling on anybody. You're not like, yes, you're reporting it, but you're handing it off. So when you alert HR, we're taking it from you. And so think of it as a way to take workload off your back of, hey, I saw this, and let HR make the decision whether or not to have those conversations. Let us decide whether or not we need to go and view or see or talk to that employee. But also really think of it from a perspective of it's now handed off to HR. And we might have to talk to you about how many times has this happened or you've seen it, but we're not going to give it back to you from an investigation standpoint. So that has really helped, drive the message within my own company about tell us what's going on, or hotline, the ethics hotline, if it's a safety issue, give it to us and let the experts weigh in and kind of take it from you. But it's definitely a supervisor. We drill at home in our annual trainings about it is the expectation that if you see something that is not right, or you're questioning whether it should happen or not, that is something that you should report. Because if you're questioning it, there's a part of you that says, this doesn't feel right. Give it to us and let us take it from there.
It's a perfect example why I love talking to my clients, because that practical approach of, I know my managers are going to think this is more work for them, and how can I mitigate that by just presenting it as, I'm taking it off your hands, I'm not making more work for you, is not something I would have thought about. All right. Well, before we wrap up, any other best practices that you guys think we should be mentioning in terms of conducting harassment training, either for managers or for the rank and file employees?
I think the things that you mentioned, Victoria, about making the training interactive, focusing on the gray areas and like just not making it a snooze fest. I mean, I think those are, to me, the key things that should go into the training because, you want the people to be engaged, you want them to care about it. And if it's just coming in and listening to a speaker for 30 minutes, I mean, that's not going to be effective. No one's going to pay any attention and they're going to leave having not learned anything, and it's really going to get you nowhere. And I've just unfortunately seen too many of those programs set up like that, where it's just, I wouldn't be able to stay awake through it.
Any last words of advice, Victoria?
Yeah, the one thing I end every training that I do is it's not about what the gender label is or what we're calling this today or what we called it yesterday. It really comes down to just respect for the human being and how you would want to be respected. And so it's not about whether or not you need to record or have a camera on you at all times, or did you say the right thing or you can't say anything right. It comes down to just are you respecting them as a human being. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are or what their beliefs are. It's just human dignity, like they're a human being. So respect. And that's always the message I leave with at the end of every training is if you walk out of here and you respected everybody, then the message was received. And so that's what I would end with.
I love that.
And that's a really good way to phrase it. Yeah, I like that.
To both of your points about how things come and go, right? Type of technology comes and goes, ways to harass, what's considered norm now versus what's not the cultural norm from before. That stuff changes and we have to keep evolving in our training to keep it fresh and current. But I love that focus on respect and bringing it on, home to this is really just about treating each other with respect. It's really a great way for us to wrap things up. Thank you so much for joining us today, Victoria. This was a really interesting discussion. And thank you for cluing in to NCIS. I'm now a groupie.
Yeah, thank you.
I have 22
welcome to the
seasons
group.
to watch.
Better get going. The new one just came out. So,
oh man, it's a show that is not going away anytime soon. But yeah, it's really a lot of fun. Thank you, our listeners. Please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and shoot us a message. Tell us what you think. And check out our blog, hiringtofiring.law. Thanks so much, everybody.
Copyright Troutman Pepper Hamilton Sanders, LLP. These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman Pepper does not make any representations or warranties, express or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including, without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepper. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.